So yeah, the reason for this broadcast today is because I wanted to address this whole touch thing some more. I wanted to talk a bit more about touch, but more so not so much from the iOS and not the whole NPC touch thing, so to speak. But I want to talk about it in terms of just platforms in general. So I feel like Apple was at the forefront of the whole touch technology for quite some time. So they come to the market with this revolutionary phone, this iPhone, and we get other revolutionary products like the iPad, and the mobile scene has been just a major thing for Apple. It's a major advancement, and as far as the whole mobile platform is concerned, it has some uses in the whole music production environment. I think that there's a lot of great things you can do with mobile devices as far as music production is concerned. You can use mobile devices for anything from being like a tape recorder to a controller, like a MIDI controller. You can use it for sequencing, MIDI sequencing. You can use a mobile device as a sound module. There's a lot of great things you can do with a mobile device today. But I also think that there's a lot of limitations with mobile devices right now. So, especially with iOS, one of the main issues I always felt with iOS devices was connectivity. So, connectivity it's a limiting factor for something that is to be used in a studio. For me at least, because I come from the paradigm of hardware. I'm was primarily a hardware based producer for some amount of years, and then I started to switch or migrate over to the desktop and laptop later on. But for me, connectivity was an important factor in the whole music production and studio environment because, okay, let's see, I'm getting a problem here. Yeah, so yeah, in the studio environment, um, for me, connectivity is king because realistically, connectivity gives me options. Without connectivity, without being able to use MIDI controllers or other peripheral devices, I'm stuck with whatever interface the device gives me. So iOS does have some workarounds and things you can use. Of course, we have the camera connection tool, and that's fine. I mean that gives you some options, and then you can connect that with a USB hub and kind of like expand the capabilities. But overall, I felt like the whole way that the iOS treats connectivity is an afterthought, and it's really boxing you into a certain way of using the device. And I think for a lot of the um, music production oriented software, it still has a primary focus on being able to play instruments from the actual screen. And I think that sure there's some merit in playing a musical instrument from a touch display for sure. I mean there's definitely some interesting things that you can accomplish with that. But I also feel like, man, there's a lot of limitations in playing from a screen. A touch screen, there's no real way to communicate the velocity and pressure that you would place on like a real instrument or even a MIDI controller for that matter. So for me, the touchscreen is very limited in terms of like expressiveness from a musical instrument standpoint, where like I can look to the analogy of say a keyboard or a guitar or something like that. From that perspective, it's very limited as a device. But there's some things that you can do with a touchscreen to get expression that go outside the paradigm of classical like keyboard instruments and other types of MIDI controllers like pad controllers and things that we would use in a studio environment. So, the touchscreen, you have XY control, so you can get a level of expression that is outside the whole music instrument play, but it's still possible. And I think there's some good things there. But overall, my point is that Apple specifically has limited what we can do primarily based on the hardware, but also there's some issues with just the way that their strategy is structured for their hardware and their devices. And I feel like there was a point in time where Apple for the musician was kind of like the best thing to have, because especially if you were dealing with say Pro Tools and Logic. Once Pro Tools and Logic, well, I should say once Logic was taken away from PC, you didn't really have a choice at that point. You had to have a Mac in order to use Logic. And then for Pro Tools, you had this issue where, sure, you can run Pro Tools on a PC, but the problem is this. It was like Pro Tools didn't work that well on most PC systems if we keep it 100. So Pro Tools worked well on, or they had like Avid approved or at that time DigiDesign approved systems that were PC Windows based that you could use. And it was only a couple. It was very specific hardware. You couldn't use this type of controller. You couldn't use this type of FireWire interface. It was very limited. So the PC route for Pro Tools was kind of like more limiting than anything. So it made more sense back when I switched to go with a Mac, just for ease of use and overall compatibility, and also just stability. The stability on the PC was horrible with Pro Tools. And I'm talking back 10 years ago. 2005 is when I made the switch over to Mac. I was a PC user prior to that for, I would say for another at least 10 years I was a PC user. So, since 95, yeah. I mean, I've been using PC for a minute. So, I feel like PC was not the thing to use for musicians unless you were just willing to put up with a lot of the fuss, or if you were using like a software that was PC only. Like if you're using Sonar or Fruity Loops or something like that, you pretty much were cool with PC, because that's the software that was gonna work with PC. But for a lot of us, it was like, what are we doing? Like a Mac is much easier to just go ahead and use for music production. So over the years, the difference in Mac and PC started to vanish. We hit that point where Macs went Intel. So then when Macs went Intel, there was not much difference in the hardware. So at that point, it's like you kind of essentially have a PC hardware, but it's in a Mac body and it's got a Mac price point. And, there were some, of course, the operating system is different. The operating system on the Mac is a lot more simplified in some ways. It's a lot more precise for a person that's not so technically inclined and not looking to do a high level of customization. The the Mac is pretty precise and it's straightforward to just, out the box be able to use without issues. So, but when they went Intel, it's like, okay, it's kind of like a PC now, but there's still some benefits. But over the years, as computer technology has continued to advance, it's like it feels like now there's not as much benefit as there used to be. Mac used to be the thing. It's more stable than PC. It crashes less. That used to be the whole spiel. Like if you were a musician, Mac crashes less. It's more stable and this and that, and that's the best thing to use if you want a stable music production environment. But I feel like in recent years, you've seen Macs have become a lot more vulnerable to viruses. First of all, it was a time where it was like Macs don't get viruses. Like, no, they get viruses just like any other computer. They crash. And now when you look at the way that some of these updates are structured now for the musicians, for music producers, it's like, well, if I upgrade to the latest operating system now, like El Capitan, that's the new thing that everybody's trying to get you on El Capitan. It's like, well, if I upgrade to El Capitan, I'm gonna have all kinds of issues with my studio. My studio may stop functioning altogether if I go to El Capitan. And to me, that's not consistent with the whole Mac paradigm of being more stable. So I wanted to discuss that a bit and just talk about my feelings about, what direction computers are going in right now and what makes sense for a musician. I want to invite a few more people into this room now. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to send another broadcast here just to let folks know I'm live right now. Cool. So, yeah, I mean, for me, the benefits were great at one point, but now it's like, well, the updates are less stable. The updates can potentially crash my system. So, what's the benefit at this point? They've removed a lot of the connectivity that the Macs used to have as an advantage over PC, because a lot of Macs at one point came standard with the FireWire, and I mean they still come standard with Thunderbolt, which is supposed to be a new audio paradigm of connectivity and it's faster and all this stuff, and it handles daisy chaining better, and that's fine. But I think ultimately, if you look at a portable Mac now and what kind of connectivity options you get, it's very limiting. I mean, first of all, okay, optical drives are dead, so that's no longer a factor. So you might get an SSD or some other type of high-speed drive, flash drive included. But then when we look at the connectivity, it's like I got a Thunderbolt and I got a Thunderbolt and maybe a USB 3 now. And if you think about that from the perspective of a studio, it's like, well, that's not a lot of connectivity options unless I buy a lot of different adapters and things like that. But I feel like the Mac is kind of going into this whole like iOS limitation domain. And not only that, but when we look at, Apple and Mac now and the recent, they had the keynote where they announced all these new products. And one of the products that I had been waiting for a long time was the iPad Pro. Now, I had heard about this for about a year and a half, and I was like, yo, the iPad Pro, this is what I was thinking at that time. A year and a half ago, before they even made the announcement, I was thinking, okay, they're going to come with an iPad Pro, and it's going to be kind of like an in-between device between this whole MacBook Air and the iPad. So it'll be a touchscreen, but it'll also have some, it'll have OS X compatibility, and it'll be something that a musician could potentially use to get a new level of just control over their software. But here we are, 2015, and the iPad Pro is essentially a bigger and faster iPad with similar connectivity issues. And what was shocking to me was, they introduced this pen, or this pen device to control it, and it just made me feel like, man, are we still convinced that that type of peripheral device is the best way to control a computer? Is the pen kind of similar to a mouse or a mouse or like trackpad or something like that? Because I feel like in some ways you're saying exactly that. Like, the touch technology is not there yet, and we have to come up with this peripheral device. And I see there's some options and capabilities of this peripheral that allow you to get a little bit more functionality out of touch, because now you can measure things like the pressure, and you can get some levels of fine adjustment and selection with the peripheral device. So there's some advantages, but it was surprising to me overall that Apple did not go in the route to make the iPad Pro a OS X device. It's still an iOS device, still has iOS limitations. It still has all the development shortcomings that iOS has right now. So you don't have any really serious software that can compete with the OS X domain in iOS. Right now, you just have applications that kind of give you a flavor or feel for the whole mobile touch paradigm, but you can't go all the way in the same way that you can go with a full-on OS X device. Now, I have some beats on with my touch device right now. My iOS device, I can make some great beats. I can make some great sounding stuff. I've played some stuff in the earlier thing. I can play some stuff now. But the thing is, I know that there are limitations. I know that it doesn't do everything that my desktop computer can do. And to a degree, the limitations can be inspiring. I've got video series on there where I talk about limitations and creativity and how limitations can inspire creativity and all that. But I also feel like the manufacturers, or specifically now, I feel like Apple is kind of holding back what the musicians can do on the touch domain, and keeping us from really experiencing a full-fledged touch system, without short of buying something like a Steven Slate Raven device, which is like, a big touch display. And I mean, that's a great device. It looks cool. You can do a lot of stuff. There's some great software features that are bundled into that whole package. But that's kind of like a studio setup where you kind of set it in your studio and it doesn't move. But that doesn't address someone that needs to be able to work that same way on the go. Like, if I want to take that with me, I don't want to pack up my Steven Slate Raven to take with me across town to a studio to still experience the whole touchscreen workflow. I'd like to have something that's a little bit more portable and, allows me to work. And, I don't necessarily need, like, I don't know what the size of the Slate Raven is, but it's a pretty large device. I don't necessarily need that much screen real estate everywhere. And so, in some cases, it can be good for, like, very large track counts and things like that. But there's some times where I just want the touch workflow to be able to touch certain menus and to move things around and just to flow more naturally than the mouse and keyboard allows you to do. So Apple's kind of limiting that. Apple is kind of limiting that in a way that I feel is unnecessary, but it's probably just necessary to their current strategy. So it leads me to this point where, you know, the horizon for touch is being limited by software development, which is also being limited by policies and strategies of one company that makes a certain computer hardware system. And I'm at the point, I've actually been at the point for a few years where I feel like the whole cost and the price performance for Mac is not where it used to be. I feel like, you know, Mac was always more expensive than PC. If you were smart enough to be able to set up a system and you were patient enough to deal with configuring a PC, you could always get a PC system that had stronger specifications and could give you much better performance for a lot cheaper. And when I say a lot cheaper, we're talking about on the order of, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, depending on how you set it up. So, I mean, the PC was always a cheaper, more cost-effective solution. And I've been looking at it more closely now as the distance between not only the hardware, but just the operating systems has closed. And I'm feeling like, now, like, man, is it a good time to go back to PC? And I have kind of come to this conclusion that this might be the right time now to start really taking PC, Windows-based systems seriously. The reason I say that is because at this point, Microsoft is bringing out full-fledged tablet systems that are compatible with some professional music production applications. So like the Surface Pro and the Surface Book right now, they're compatible. They have, you know, multi-touch compatibility with programs such as Fruity Loops 12, and, you know, also the big one that's really interesting for me right now, being an Ableton Live user, is Bitwig. The Bitwig 1.3 is offering multi-touch compatibility with this software. So it's very interesting to me now that you have the potential to have a full-fledged studio-grade application that supports a mobile touchscreen running a full-fledged operating system such as Windows 10. To me, that's very interesting, and it feels like this is a point where PC, Windows specifically, Microsoft has beat Apple to the punch as far as professional applications are concerned. And I think for me, it's very interesting having, you know, done a lot of tinkering with iOS and, you know, making some music with iOS, but really being just interested in the touch paradigm more than the iOS. I'm platform agnostic as far as, you know, these platforms go. I don't have any allegiance to any platform. There's no ultimate platform as far as operating systems go for me. I'm more interested in the workflow and the overall experience. And I've been frustrated with using trackpads and you know, all the other typical peripheral devices for computers to control my music software, because I don't come from that frame of mind. To me, music software should be hands-on. It should be engaging. It shouldn't be driven by some mouse when, you know, there's a lot of things that our hands can do that a mouse can't do as easily. So for me, Microsoft is presenting a solution now that is very promising for me, and they beat Apple to the punch. And for all the guys out there that are still, you know, like hesitant about PC and stuff, I just say I recommend you do your homework. Look at what the Surface Pro and the Surface Book can do now with programs like Fruity Loops 12 and Bitwig 1.3, which is on the horizon. It's not out yet, but there is a demo available. And when you see how they've changed the interface and made it more touch friendly, and you can see some of the video demonstrations of what they're doing, it makes me feel like this is a good time to like really go out and say, I'm gonna go PC now. Because for me, running a dedicated software that is compatible or made specifically to work with this device and works with the whole touchscreen paradigm is, I mean, that really speaks volumes to me. You know, a lot of people are talking about the NPC Touch right now and how that's opening up a new form of creativity and new possibilities for music producers, because you can now touch things that were once kind of like hidden behind the mouse and keyboard. Now you can get interactive with it. But that's to a limited degree, because we know a MPC is essentially a groove box, and it has all the limitations of a groove box. But if we look at something like Fruity Loops, or I should say FL Studio. I keep saying Fruity Loops because I'm a little bit older, so for me it was Fruity Loops. And don't get me wrong, when I first started, I actually used Fruity Loops before I had hardware. To be 100% with you, I used Fruity Loops, and I actually had some other software like Hammerhead, Rhythm Station, and things like that before Fruity Loops. But Fruity Loops was like one of the first PC applications that I used to make beats, that and Acid. So I respect what you can do with Fruity Loops, but it's Fruity Loops to me, even though it's now called FL Studio 12 or whatever. Just keep in mind that's what I'm saying when I'm saying Fruity Loops. I'm talking about FL Studio 12. But anyhow, when you see what you can do now with the touch screen, with FL Studio 12, it's amazing to me that we don't have anything equivalent on the OS X side. And then when you look at what Bitwig is doing, they're taking it to the next level. They're, further delineating themselves from everyone else and saying, we're going to kind of go all in now. Because you see, all the other manufacturers right now seem to be convinced that the integrated controller is all the way. And I mean, I've worked with integrated controllers pretty much since they first really started showing up. I was one of the early adopters of Core. I loved Core. Core spoke. Native Instruments Core was this this desktop controller basically that you can put on your desktop or on top of your computer or on top of your keyboard, MIDI controller, and it kind of acted like the brains of a workstation instrument. So you kind of had this ability to change parameters, and you would see bidirectional feedback, and it had a display that showed you the parameters, and you could change parameters from this hardware controller, and you can also browse through different patches in this environment. Core was a software and hardware system. It predates Machine and MPC Renaissance and all that. So if you were a Core user, you actually experienced a taste of the potential of a lot of these integrated systems now, because Core actually had a high level of connectivity that the current integrated systems don't really offer. Now they kind of limit you, they're kind of boxed in, but Core was very customizable. You could really set it up to be programmed the way you want it. It was a 16-part multi-timbral software. So to me, what that said to me was like Core could potentially replace my Motif keyboard to a degree, because now I have a software-based 16-part multi-timbral device that I can use in the studio. And I was using it with my MPC, and it was my sound module. It made it so that my computer became a sound module, because I've been doing that for a long time. Like, the computer was a sound module for me for a long time. Like, when I found out I could make Reason a sound module, I went all in on that. I got videos from like, 6, 7, 8 years ago doing that kind of stuff. That was very appealing to me. I think I started doing that really about 9 years ago, actually. That was when I really started saying Reason was going to be my sound module. And then Core came along, and Core, Core was a VST host. So then I had some frustrations with some of the limitations in sounds in Reason. So VST was the option that gave me more sound variety. So I was like, come on, that's it right there. But, of course, Core had its limitations as well. Core didn't have any multi-core support. So you would hit walls quickly when you started to use more complex instruments and sounds. So then, years later, you have things like Machine, and later on the Renaissance, and now you have other systems like the Kai Advance, and you have other systems like the Complete Control system that offer you some of these features and functionality. So a lot of manufacturers feel like the hands-on workflow that they can deliver from an integrated controller is the way to provide a musician with a proper musical experience. And I agree to some degree that the tactile knobs and certain types of like fader controllers can be useful. But the main issue for me with the integrated system was the feedback. Having feedback on the device was the utmost importance to me, because without the feedback, the controllers are generic, right? So you don't know what the controller is controlling on the hardware device without the feedback telling you this is what the parameter is, this is the value state of it. But with the touchscreen, it's like everything is on screen. So for me, an ideal controller would incorporate both. But realistically, I don't want to be locked into a controller that only works for one software application. So that's my problem with, say, like an MPC Touch, is that, MPC Touch is designed to work with the MPC software. That's actually my problem with the MPC Renaissance as well. It's like, the Renaissance is a great system, but as soon as you get out of the MPC software, it doesn't do anything. You can't hook it up to another software and really use a lot of the functionality that the hardware offers you without doing a lot of mapping and stuff, and it becomes more complicated and you don't get the same level of bidirectional feedback. So then it becomes like a generic MIDI controller as far as I'm concerned. So for me, being locked into a specific hardware controller that is locked into a specific software is not the way. So that's why the iOS thing at first, like the mobile touchscreens were appealing, because I could pull up any software and get a touch experience, right? I could pull up any application and get a touch experience. So now moving towards the Surface, the Microsoft Surface Pro and the Surface Book, it's like the same thing now. You have a universal hardware that can work with multiple software applications. So I'm not locked into, only this hardware only works with this application. No, this hardware works with all the applications that can be developed for that platform. And for me, the only thing that I need knobs and faders for, like, very specific types of controls. Like, I mean, for me, the most important controls are not actually the knobs and faders, because I've become kind of comfortable with doing the faders on the screen. Like, I don't necessarily need to grab a fader and pull it. That's not that important. Knobs can be a little bit more of a sensitive thing, depending on how you like to perform. Because, for me, when you're like controlling things like a filter or whatever, a knob definitely feels better. So if I can have a controller that just automatically mapped, similar to how like these MPDs map to Ableton, where it's just like it's a generic controller in a way, but it's automatically mapped to the devices. So it's like a macro controller for the devices, and then the rest of the experience is touch. That's like the best of both worlds for me. Because now I would, for me, the most important control, again, as I was saying, is the actual instrument control. pads, and keys. Those are the most important controls, not so much the knobs and the faders. The knobs and faders are secondary to me to the actual instrument controls. I actually do like transport controls being hard as well, just because I like the tactile, the click response of a transport controller. But I mean, those are very, minute things. The rest of the stuff, I like being able to go on the screen and touch, and be able to move things around at my will. So the idea of Bitwig and a Surface Pro being a potential studio solution is like really intriguing to me, and I'm really highly considering going in that direction and moving my studio in that direction, because I've been on the verge of going all PC for a while, and I was waiting for a software title that would allow me to move away from Pro Tools and Logic and all that. And when I found Ableton some years back, I mean, I've been on Ableton for a while now. I would say at least 6-7 years now. So I'm not new to Ableton at all. But Bitwig being pretty much Ableton Live without some of the complicated aspects of Ableton Live, it kind of improves on things that are lacking in Ableton. It feels like, well, now you have a touch display, full-on operating system with Windows 10, and a enhanced version, so to speak, arguably enhanced version of Ableton Live available in a semi-portable device. To me, that's a no-brainer. Now, it's yet to be seen how stable it is. I'm objective about this. I like to use stuff that works. So if it doesn't work, I'm quick to tell you that doesn't work. That's not for me. I tell this story a lot to people because a lot of people know my relationship with Native Instruments and Machine. I've developed sound libraries for Native Instruments for the past 6 years for Machine. But when I first got Machine, prior to working for Native Instruments, Machine was not for me. I was on the MPC and I was using Core in my setup. So I had an MPC 2500. The Core setup was cool. I got the Machine a couple months after it came out. It was so primitive that it was unusable for me. The thing didn't even have a count in, let alone full-on MIDI support. It was lacking a lot of basic features that I already had on the systems I was using. Now, I wasn't like opposed to a software sampler at all, because like I said, I was using Core, and in my Core setup, I was actually using Contact and Battery. Battery 3 was actually my first introduction to Native Instruments software altogether. So Battery, I've used Battery 3 for almost 10 years. 2006, like seriously, I've been using it for a while. So I was not new to the idea of a software sampler, but I couldn't understand why Machine was so limited and Battery was so capable as a sampler. But Machine did offer some promise, because I saw the technology and said, this is going in the direction that I want, but it's not there yet. So when I got my Machine, after a couple months of using it, it was actually about a month, really. Like I took it through its paces in a month, and I was like, nah, this is not for me. And I sold my Machine, straight up. 2009, I sold my Machine. I was not feeling it. But, later on I started working with Native Instruments and, helping to develop it and, push things along. So it's like, well, I saw the promise even more. There was a lot of hope, and when the Machine 1.5 came out, it offered a lot of the things that I had suggested and other producers had suggested. So it was great. You know what I'm saying? So needless to say, that paradigm of control showed a lot of promise and potential, but I also feel like now that we've got touch displays at our disposal as musicians, that paradigm offers us even more control. Controls that I can't really foresee a integrated hardware device alone being able to offer. And I'm not one to be locked into the hardware. I mean, I think if you can develop a hardware controller that works for a lot of different things, like if it can work for the, say, the MPC software, but then it also equally works well for Ableton, and it equally works well for Cubase and all these other applications, then we might be somewhere where it's like a worthy investment for me. But in the case where it's just locked into one software, so what happens is you end up with a whole bunch of controller devices that don't do anything by themselves. And I have a lot of controller devices. There's an MPD32 right here. I got a Renaissance. I got a Machine MK2. I got a Studio. I got a APC Mini. I mean, I got devices like crazy that only work with one software. I mean, at least the MPD is kind of neutral, but for the most part, the other devices are locked in. So I don't want more devices like that around, because that's pointless for me. I'd rather have a hardware device that is the actual computer that is acting as the brains and actually allows me to do the touch interface. Ooh, crazy. I had a bug come at me. That's crazy. Anyhow, I have all these. That's ridiculous. Um, I have all these different controllers, but it's like, why do I want so many controllers like that when I can just deal with a hardware device? So that's where I am, and I'm really considering the Touch, the Surface Pro as like an option with Bitwig, because I'm really a fan of what Bitwig is doing with the music production software. So anyhow, that's my rant. That's what I want to talk about today. Let me know your thoughts. I'm gonna close this up now, but I'm gonna put the replay on my YouTube. I'm at YouTube as Altruwest as well, so go ahead and check it out there. And yeah, let's discuss this more. What do you think? Is it time to move away from Mac? Is it time to start considering other options such as Windows, or is Mac still king? I want to know your thoughts on that. All right. Until next time, I just want to tell y'all peace. God bless. Continue to seek wisdom, because wisdom is supreme. Wisdom is supreme. So continue seeking wisdom, and let's just continue to get it in. All right. Peace.